I watched the video. Leslie watched the video. Edwin's significant other watched the video. My wife watches it. All the ladies seem to line up on one side. All the men kind of lined up on the other side. And I think it really, I think it's interesting. So when you're talking to folks about how they should handle road rage, what are you telling your clients? We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we are talking about road rage. There's a little bit to this, and we've covered this topic in the past, but we're going to be going over, these false accusations on the rise. Are dash cams a good idea? Best practices. Leslie and I disagree a little bit on this, and our biggest pitfall we see. And it's not just straight up talking to the police. There's a little bit to this. So we're going to be talking about all this and more. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And welcome, Leslie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, have you ever had a road rage client before?
Have I ever had a road rage client before? I would say that actually probably 25% of my client caseload currently is road rage cases.
Yeah. And these things are, they stink because they're so dynamic. Vehicle, deadly weapon, obviously tempers, right. People don't let you merge, people speed up too fast, people tailgate. Everybody seems to be in a hurry and very angry on the roadway. And this is one of those areas that is ripe for gun owners to get not just charged with all kinds of different crimes, but false accusations.
Yeah, we see it all the time. And I'll tell you, what happens and the calls we get, it's the same thing every time. Person gets in a road rage situation, they try to get away, they can't get away, they feel as though they can't get away. Sometimes it's a situation where the other driver motions and says, hey, pull over or something like that. And they pull over. And when they pull over, the other person gets out of the car, approaches their vehicle, and our person, because they are a license to carry holder, typically lawful gun owner, law-abiding citizen, will either take their firearm out of the center console and put it on their lap.
Yeah, to get ready.
Just in case they need it. Or, remove it from wherever it is to put it on their lap just in case they need it. Now, the problem with that is that the other person always calls the police and says, hey, that guy pointed a gun at me.
Yeah, this maniac pulled a gun on me for no reason.
Right, exactly. And our client, 9 times out of 10, will say, I didn't point a gun at him. I never pointed the gun at them. I took it out. I put it on my lap just in case I needed it. And that's it. But here's the problem. The police call or the police come to the scene and they ask our guy, hey, do you have a gun in your car? And our person, being the law-abiding citizen, having done nothing wrong, says, well, yeah, I do have a gun in my car. The cop says, okay, well, that guy said it was a black gun that you pointed at him. What color is your gun? Shocker, it's black.
Yeah, this is why we made a video on this a long time ago about why everyone needed a pink bedazzled firearm. Because, it is a little silly. And obviously, we talk about function enhancing modifications to firearms. We usually break these into 2 categories. Does this make you more lethal on target? Well, we usually don't lose sleep over those things. But things that don't increase your lethality are difficult to explain in front of a jury. They just kind of cause needless issues. We typically tell folks, obviously, this is a, risk calculation. Do whatever you want. Everybody's an adult. But sometimes, it might not be in your best interest. This is the one exception I think we decided to carve out for road rage purposes because, again, everybody says it's either a black or silver firearm.
Yeah, I would love to have a pink bedazzled pistol. That would be awesome. But yeah, no, it is. And so, the police say, oh, really? You have a black gun in your car? Fantastic. Let me see it. And our person, being the law-abiding citizen, says, sure, officer, here you go. The officer goes, that's weird. That guy says you pointed a black gun at him. You have a black gun in your car. 1 + 1 must equal 2. Click, click. And you're under arrest. And now you're charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. And you're facing 2 to 20.
Yeah, and that's the tough part. Anytime a firearm leaves a holster or, let's say it gets displayed in public, and there's legitimate reasons to do this, right? A lot of altercations don't happen because a firearm is brandished as a warning, stops the attack, all these other things. But that's all to say, self-defense is a justification that would otherwise exclude criminal responsibility. Maybe you beat the rap, but you don't beat the ride kind of deal. And going back to these gun cards, the range of punishment on a lot of these things are absolutely wild. Just think about a typical road rage case where a firearm is alleged to have been brandished. There's about a dozen different crimes the police could kind of try to fit the peg into the round hole on. So you got to be very careful.
Yeah, and I would say most of the time what they end up going with is, some sort of aggravated assault charge.
Yeah.
And the other problem is that we have people who say they are shaking their fist at the person.
Or holding a cell phone recording the incident.
Yeah, we've had that happen. But again, officer says, well, do you have a gun in the car? And they say, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll get back to, this pitfall with police in just a little bit, but I think that, talking about recording these incidents, it's a good time to talk about, is a dash camera inside of these vehicles, is that a good idea? And I think we've kind of settled on this, and I'd be interested because I don't know your opinion, Leslie. You know, my opinion so far has been, it captures reasonable people acting reasonably, and it captures unreasonable people acting unreasonably. It's not a magic bullet, get out of jail free card, and so, it captures essentially what happened.
Yeah, I agree with you. It does. And, I mean, that's a double-edged sword, right? Because there are times when people say, I never did that. And then we go back and look at the video and, well, it turns out they did. And they just, in the moment, remember it differently. So if you are acting like a reasonable person and you didn't do anything wrong, then it could be really great to have. If you potentially got a little hot-headed and, did something maybe a little too soon you shouldn't have, the good advice there is always to allow an attorney to review that footage before you even mention it to the police, and especially before you give it to them. But a lot of times once you mention it, cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, because, well, and we'll give a tip on dash cams, but that's right. The police, if they believe that, evidence of a crime, again, kind of making air quotes here, because a lot of times these are based on false accusations. If they believe that there's evidence of the crime contained inside the dash camera and the DVR or whatever's recording media, the police, they'll be able to get a warrant or at least seize the material so that it can be preserved so they can later obtain a warrant and search it. And so, that's kind of goes to one tip on dash cams. Maybe you have this thing, one, don't bring it to the attention of police. Let an attorney review it first. But there are dash cams out there that are pretty discreet, and unless someone is really looking for them, they can't find them. So I think that the tip is, if you can get a discreet dash cam, that might be a good idea. But I think we talk now about, best practices. And this is the great male-female debate with, how should you treat these situations? Because I'll tell you, we have a current client involved in, I guess we'll chalk it up to road rage. I watched the video, Leslie watched the video, Edwin's significant other watched the video, my wife watches it. All the ladies seem to line up on one side, all the men kind of lined up on the other side, and I think it really, I think it's interesting. So when you're talking to folks about how they should handle road rage, what are you telling your clients?
Yeah, so my go-to is that if you can get away from the situation safely, that's what you need to do. Look, we live in Houston. I understand it is stressful. I drive on big freeways all the time. I get mad all the time. And I just remember, hey, you know what? This just isn't worth it. You want to go in front of me? Okay, fine, go in front of me. But the big difference seems to be between men and women and their need to stop and discuss this situation. I think women tend to think, yeah, I don't need to talk about this outside of my car. I don't need to show my pride. We're good. I'm going to move on. I'm going to go talk bad about you behind your back later, and we'll settle it.
Oh, that's where okay, I was wondering where the safety valve was on all this. Okay, it's later.
Yes. Men, however, like I said, sometimes a person will say, hey, pull over, pull over. Men seem to feel the need to pull over. I don't know what men think is going to happen.
We're going to discuss our differences like gentlemen.
Sure. I don't know if they think the other person's going to say, hey, man, I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean to cut you off. That's not what's going to happen. They are going to try to fight you. That's why they want you to pull over. And again, men seem to want to pull over and have that altercation. Women, on the other hand, don't. And the video that Richard was discussing, the first time I watched it, Edwin asked me what I thought. And I said, I think that person should have stayed in their car. And he was like, wait, what? He was like, that's exactly what my significant other said. And again, all the women who watched the video were like, why did the guy get out of the car? And all the men are like, of course he got out of the car. So it's an interesting difference.
Yeah, I will say, I'm not advocating that you get out of the car. But, I think the best, and this is a good self-defense principle, regardless of what kind of situation it is, avoidance. That's one of those things that a jury will consider. Now, think about Texas and other states that have stand your ground or no legal duty imposed on you to retreat. You're in a place you're legally allowed to be, you're not committing a crime, you haven't provoked, tricked the person into fighting you. Guess what? A jury might get an instruction that says the failure of this person to attempt to retreat or otherwise flee cannot be considered for any reason. But guess what? juries, even when they're given that express instruction from the court, they cannot help themselves. They consider that stuff all day long. And that's why avoidance is one of those
Right.
things where, even though it may not be legally required, I would say as long as it doesn't put you at like a tactical advantage or is going to endanger you or something like that, then maybe that's a good idea because juries are going to consider it regardless. If
Right.
it's going to cause you to, place yourself in danger, obviously we don't want folks to get hurt. So obviously we're not going to do that. But, one of these things, and this is what police, prosecutors, juries, especially when it comes to road rage cases, you're in your big, safe, metal, movable box. Why didn't you XYZ? Why didn't you exit the freeway? Why didn't you drive to the nearest police station? I mean, these are all the arguments that get made inside the courtroom. So I tend to agree with, at a minimum, staying inside the vehicle. And here's the other kind of strategic advantage to that. Well, if this person, let's say they point a deadly weapon at you, a firearm, right? Well, obviously you get to defend yourself, right? But another thing that a lot of states have is that you have additional castle doctrine protections inside of your occupied vehicle. So if the person tries to forcefully and unlawfully enter or has entered, let's say they smash through your window and punch you, guess what? Maybe you have extra self-defense protections. Any type of situation where we can find, hey, you have scenario A where you don't have these legal presumptions of reasonableness or extra self-defense protections. I want my clients to have those, and so that's kind of where I land on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen the videos of, road rage situations that get very scary where, the person pursuing the other person, it makes it almost impossible to get away. Or look, the person blocks you in and you literally can go nowhere. Then again, that's kind of where those castle doctrine
Yeah, and I'll say juries
situations
won't.
come in.
Yeah, juries won't hold it against you if there is no
Right.
opportunity. Right. That's a completely different thing.
Correct.
But if there's an opportunity, then they'll consider. But I think that's a really really good point.
And the other thing that you need to think about is that, if that person points a firearm at you, you need to try to get away so that they don't shoot you, and you aren't harmed, A, but B, if you do defend yourself, you have literally a bunch of moving components, right? So you're in a moving car, they're in a moving car, the bullet moves. So if you're trying to shoot through your window into someone else's moving car, that creates a whole nother scenario of dangerous situations. There's a bunch of other cars on the road. There's businesses behind the road. I mean, there's potentially schools, school buses, that sort of thing. I have had a case before where the person it wasn't road rage, it was actually a self-defense situation, but they ended up shooting a bunch of rounds and they ended up striking a ambulance. And they ended up getting charged for that because they struck that vehicle that wasn't even involved in the situation. And so DA's office agreed that, them shooting was self-defense, but them striking that other vehicle because that wasn't the target that they were aiming at wasn't considered self-defense. And they didn't really have a defense against that situation. So that's something else to think about when you are trying to shoot in a moving vehicle at a moving vehicle with a bullet that moves. You're accountable for all of those shots that you fire.
Yeah, and really it goes back to keeping yourself safe, your family safe. Don't want folks to get hurt, right? All right, now I wanted to talk about, this is the biggest pitfall. I mean, by far and away, this is what happens with a lot of road rage cases. Folks need to be aware of it and how to handle it. And that has to do with, and I'm just going to lay out the scenario because I bet 80% of these situations unfold like this. Road rage unfolds. Defender either takes firearm out to, get it ready just in case, or maybe they've had to brandish it as a warning, or let's say they record the vehicle with a cell phone. Ultimately there's a false allegation that, defender pointed a firearm at another person. Okay, but situation neutralized, nobody hurt. Whatever you did had the effect of stopping the attack. You return home, maybe the same day, maybe a day later, you get a call from a police investigator saying, hey, we have questions about this incident. And this is where people screw up big time.
Yep. And that is when they do what they think is the right thing and they cooperate with police and they speak to police because in their minds, they're lawful citizens. They lawfully own a firearm. They did nothing wrong. They were pursued. They defended themselves or they didn't ever point their firearm at anyone at all. And like Richard said, they just put it on their lap to get ready.
Or they assume the other person's telling the truth.
Right. Or that they assume the other person told the truth. And so they talk with the police. And when the police officer says, hey, did you have a firearm on your vehicle? Again, they say, yeah, officer, I did. I had my lawfully owned firearm. And That's all the police need to hear. So that's a situation in which you want to take the Fifth Amendment and say, with all due respect, officer, let me speak to an attorney before I talk to you.
Yeah, and this can be really innocuous, and they're gonna try to trick you. And it can be something so small that you would think how could this get me in trouble? But keep in mind, you don't know what this crazy, unhinged lunatic liar has said, right?
Right.
So keep that in the back of your mind. They didn't say, oh, I cut a guy off and then he got mad at me. I was in the wrong, and, then I tailgated him and chased him all over town, and then, he got scared and he might have pulled a gun. They don't say that kind of stuff.
Mm-mm.
They say, I was driving down the road, minding my own business, and for no reason, this maniac wielding a firearm, started pointing it at me like a crazed madman with hate in his eyes. And, thankfully I got away and everything's safe. It's probably closer to that second version is what they told the police.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the police call you and say, hey, I'm calling about what happened on the roadway the other day, do you know what I'm talking about? Yes, I do.
Yep.
Boom. You have just corroborated everything that lunatic has said. And now the police have what we call probable cause that a crime likely occurred. So this is one of those things where you cannot corroborate anything that a liar might say. You don't know what they told the police. And so the simple response is, hey, officer so-and-so with this department, I'm investigating a thing. Do you know what I'm calling about? Don't even, not even going this far. Saying, hey, I want to help as much as I can, but can't speak to you without an attorney. Let me get your contact information and we'll be in touch.
Yep.
You got to stay away from that stuff.
Yeah. And I don't know how many times I've had a person tell me, but that guy lied. That guy is lying. What he said was a lie. Yeah. Well, sorry about you, man. That guy's lie is now getting you arrested, and now we have to go to court, and we have to find some way to show that this guy was lying and you're telling the truth. And it comes down to he said, she said, and those types of situations. I mean, it's who the cops want to believe. And unfortunately, a lot of times they believe the other guy because you are the one allegedly holding a gun, and they like to make those arrests for firearms related offenses.
Yeah, so don't speak to the police.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing corroborating. Speak to an attorney first. But, I think if folks did that, we'd see a huge drop in charges all over the country. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And don't forget to question and comment in the section down below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.